there are stories that hold an endless fascination for us. Ancient legends told all over the world about life in the wilderness. About children left to their own devices, growing up among animals. They are called feral children. Their behavior resembles that of the animals they live with.
If I'm living out in nature, with no safe surroundings, no one to tuck me in at night or keep me warm, I have to adapt to those conditions to survive.
It's actually still possible today for children to grow up for some time without human company. This time leaves its mark on them for the rest of their lives.
The thoughts of feral children are dictated by their socialization. If they're raised by a pack of wolves, they will think like wolves. If they grow up with a bear, they'll think like a bear.
Perhaps the most famous feral child is Mowgli, the hero of Kipling's Jungle Book, who is raised by wolves. But how much truth is there in such stories about wild children? It's July in the year 1724, near the city of Hamelin in Germany. Two men discover a boy, about 12 years old, apparently neglected. The boy will preoccupy his contemporaries for years to come, going down in history as Peter the Wild Boy. People will claim that he was raised by bears, and they will treat him like an animal too.
He couldn't speak a word, and he was taken in and fed and beaten because in those days it was normal to just beat children to make sure that they acted right.
The boy's behavior was anything but normal, though. Not just because he couldn't speak. A contemporary writes, he reaches into the bowl clumsily with his hands and tears the meat apart with his teeth. He does not appear to have enjoyed any upbringing at all. No one knows who he is, and no one seems to be looking for him either. And so the people of Hamelin, who are at their wits' end, lock him up. A chronicler reports that the children of the village name him Peter. We will never know the boy's real name. At the time, people believe he belongs to a human subspecies, the Homo ferus, or wild man. The voices of those who consider the child to be mentally handicapped are ignored. The story of Peter the Wild Boy is just too good. 10 years later, the Swedish natural scientist Carl Linnaeus actually includes Peter in his famous Systema Naturae as a subspecies of Homo sapiens.
The idea of Homo ferus, the wild man, is probably an invention of the 18th century. The 18th century was the time when scientists who grew up with the ideas of the Enlightenment began to imagine that there was another way of being human. And some scientists were searching for the pure human, for the human who's uncorrupted by civilization and all the nasty things that go along with civilization. The focus on those few cases known back then of human beings who never lived in human society. These people then became objects of study in order to clarify the question, what is a human being?
While people are wondering about the nature of human beings, news keeps arriving from far-off, often exotic countries. A number of European powers establish a firm foothold in the Orient. India, for example, becomes the most important crown colony of the British Empire. The mid-1800s see the beginning of British rule in India, known as the British Raj. Tens of thousands of military personnel and civil servants come to live on the subcontinent with their wives and children. India becomes known as the jewel in the crown of the empire. One of the children of the Raj is the author Rudyard Kipling, who was born in Bombay in 1865. Under the watchful eyes of his personal servant, Mita, Rudyard discovers the magical world of the subcontinent that is his home. While his father is busy as principal of an art school and his mother is running the household, Rudyard spends most of his time in the company of Mita, who is much more to him than just a servant. In his tales, the myths and legends of India come to life.
Für Rudyard war es wichtig zu lauschen, aber auch zu sehen.
It was important to Rudyard to listen, but also to see these stories being acted out. Kipling later adopted this same technique of putting himself in the position of his characters.
Die dann erzählt hat.
Mita also teaches the boy Hindi. His favourite stories are those about the inhabitants of the Jangal, as the subtropical rainforest is called in Hindi, the local language. Only later does he learn how Jangal evolved into the English word jungle. And it's not just the Indian jungle that holds secrets. Just a few years ago, far away in Africa, the African rainforest served as the backdrop for an astonishing story. It's the story of a boy who has since grown up to become a man. In his home country, Uganda, he is a household name, the famous Monkey Boy. Today, John Sesabunya is training for the Special Olympics. But as a small child, he lived alone in the forest. His story has been investigated by scientists and is considered credible. He was discovered by chance among a group of monkeys in 1991 by a woman collecting firewood and taken to an orphanage.
Looking at the nails, if you saw the nails, they were long and they bent like this, and the type of hair he had, that told you that this boy had been away from people for a long time.
When he was 4 or 5 years old, John allegedly witnessed his stepfather killing his mother. The boy fled into the jungle. Nobody knows exactly how long he lived there. When he was found, he was believed to be between 6 and 10 years of age. A teacher took him into her care.
The John I see today is much more modernized than the John I saw coming out from the forest for the first time. The other John's body was covered in hair. He was very dark with brown hair and he was scared of people. Now, John can relate to us well.
At first, John was withdrawn and didn't talk. But as he had learned to speak before running away from home, language came back to him, and he was able to talk more about who had helped him survive in the forest. Vervet monkeys. These primates are native to many parts of Africa and live in large groups, consisting mainly of females and their young. Although they are good climbers, they spend most of their time on the ground. John claims he lived among them.
They brought food, but most of the time they offered me protection.
However, monkeys usually don't even feed other members of their own species. So what are we to make of John's claim? Scientists at Dortmund Zoo have been studying the eating habits of primates, in this case, orangutans. Their findings are astonishing.
Das gibt's nicht. Hat das jetzt geteilt? Der hat die geteilt, der hat die... Halbe. Das soll ich zufassen.
Behavior that may seem perfectly normal to ordinary people causes a sensation among the scientists.
The established view expressed in the literature is that monkeys do not actively share with each other. When they do share, it is passive, meaning they tolerate someone else taking something away from them. But monkeys have hardly ever been observed giving up a significant portion of their food to another animal, so that surprised us tremendously.
It's not clear whether monkeys only do this in zoos or also in the wild. Neither do we know whether this behavior is found in all primates. In Uganda, the monkeys favor living in the forest that borders on the savannah. Their food mainly consists of young leaves, grasses, flowers, berries, and fruit. John claims they shared these with him for months, maybe even years.
Der Bericht von John Sesebunja, dass also die Affen mit ihm Futter geteilt haben.
John Sesebunya's account of the monkeys sharing their food with him is very interesting. In retrospect, we can only guess at whether the female monkeys actively shared their food with him or whether they simply granted him access to it, which he then interpreted as sharing.
Hat Nahrung bekommen. Hat etwas abbekommen.
From our perspective, we would view the latter as a case of passive sharing, but he interpreted it, in line with monkey behavior, in the sense that he received food, so they had shared it with him.
Sie haben mit ihm geteilt.
An American scientist who studied John's case shortly after it came to light has no doubt that the boy did in fact live among monkeys for a period of time. Monkeys are also part of young Rudyard Kipling's daily life in India, though he calls them bandar, the Hindi word for monkey.
Monkey. Bandar.
For in the first 6 years of his life, the boy speaks more Hindi than English. He spends most of his time with Meeta, who reveals to him the most beautiful aspects of India. He also shows him how the locals live. The young English boy experiences the best of both worlds. He may not live in a palace, but he does enjoy a number of privileges. During British rule, some 150,000 Englishmen are living on the subcontinent, ruling over 300 million Indians. And although the Kiplings are not considered very affluent back home in London, here they are members of the ruling class. As a result, Rudyard grows up with a sense of being someone special, though he is never presumptuous. He and his little sister regard their domestic servants as protectors and confidants. Later, as a writer, Rudyard incorporates much of what he experiences with Meeta into his stories.
Man muss erst mal sagen, dass das schon sehr mutig von den
It was certainly very courageous of his parents to leave their children in the care of the locals
Einheimischen so übergeben haben.
and to allow those locals, the ayah or nanny, as well as the Meeta, the male servant, both members of one of the lower castes, to have such a strong influence on the children.
Einer gewissen unteren Kaste, dass diese Einheimischen so einen starken Einfluss auf die Kinder genommen haben.
For Rudyard, childhood is one big adventure. Later, as a celebrated writer, Kipling will discount Hinduism with its many gods as hocus pocus. But as a young boy, he enjoys its mysterious ceremonies.
Those first 6 or 7 years were certainly his happiest, and that is how he described them.
Auch so beschrieben.
Kipling's autobiography begins with the words, "Give me the first 6 years of a child's life, and you can have the rest." Completely unburdened by school or other obligations, the young Sahib experiences a colourful, magical world. A world that feels strange, and at the same time familiar. A world that obeys its own laws, far removed from the strict rules of the British Empire. However, when Rudyard turns 7, his exciting life with Meeta comes to an abrupt end.
They had a very close relationship, and this is why he suffered so much when he was sent back to England.
In keeping with the usual customs of the time, The Kiplings send their children to boarding schools in England, all on their own. It's a traumatic end to a carefree childhood. Rudyard loses all his confidants in one fell swoop. It's no coincidence that such children are nowadays referred to as Raj orphans.
Kipling
probably escaped into a dream world to make his situation more bearable. And this dream world led to the wonderful creation of Mowgli.
The result was that he shot up straight into...
30 years later, Kipling tells his firstborn daughter Josephine stories about a little boy and his incredible adventures in the jungle of India.
Directly in front of Father Wolf, holding on by a low branch, stood a naked brown baby who could just walk.
It all begins with a tiger attacking his parents and Mowgli fleeing into the jungle, where he's taken in by a pack of wolves. He becomes a wolf boy, a feral child.
From Kipling's point of view, the Jungle Book represents an ideal state, though he knows that this state cannot be maintained. Still, it was very important to Kipling to describe this state of limbo, hovering between animals and people, between childhood and adulthood. He wanted to tell us about the things that moved him deeply, the humanity and the solidarity that play an important role in his story.
Had it not been for his happy childhood in India, the Jungle Book would probably not exist. That's why he dedicates the book to his daughter Josephine. She was the reason he wrote down the stories, he says. They tell us about the peaceful coexistence of animals, but also about dangerous predators. The starring role, however, is played by the wolf pack that takes in Mowgli after the violent separation from his parents and protects him from all dangers.
The wolf pack stands for the notion of family, for the family's love of its children, or in this case, its cubs, and for its efforts to guide the family through these dangers.
Kipling is not the first to write about a feral child, however. For thousands of years, legends have been telling us about wolves that have taken in lost children. But what is the reality of such tales?
Sit. Stay. No. Stay.
At the Wolf Research Center, Ernst Brunn, scientists are studying the similarities between wolves, dogs, and humans, especially with regard to their social intelligence and their willingness to cooperate.
Around. Sit. Super.
Although they are raised by hand, the wolves later live in a pack with other wolves.
We are their social partners, but we are not members of their pack, and we have never aspired to that. We never interfere in matters within their pack. A grown-up doesn't need to be afraid of wolves. A lot of things need to go wrong before a wolf will attack a fully grown human being. With children it's different though. A small child walking alone in the forest, maybe stumbling a little, with a high-pitched voice, looks like prey to them. They are, after all, predators, so they are dangerous.
Stories from India demonstrate just how dangerous they can be. These stories tell of wolves sneaking into villages at night and abducting babies. Such legends, which stubbornly persist in India, have only been known in Europe since the mid-19th century. At the time, William Henry Sleeman, a British Major General, is roaming the subcontinent. His mission is to gather information about a network of secret fraternities who attack travellers, robbing and killing them. His search leads him to the remotest villages, where he hears some astonishing accounts. Again and again, peasants tell him about small children disappearing from houses or the edges of fields after being left there by their parents, so as to be able to work undisturbed. They also tell him about children living with wolves. In 1852, Sleeman publishes a pamphlet on the topic, which quickly makes the headlines in England.
William Sleeman collected 8 stories concerning wolf children, but he never experienced any of these incidents himself. He was not an eyewitness. Nobody questioned the validity of these stories because people wanted to believe them. Simple as that. And suddenly, the tales of wolf children just started flooding the market.
One of the most exciting stories was written by an Anglican priest in the early 1920s. It's about 2 girls, Amala and Kamala, who allegedly lived with a family of wolves in an old termite hill.
Reverend Singh was apparently an eyewitness. He saw these children taken from the termite hill. He was there when the mother wolf was killed with bow and arrow, and he saw the other wolves run into the forest, and 2 wolf pups were taken captive as well. And so, I mean, who's not going to believe an Anglican minister about what he saw?
The girls behave like animals. On December the 19th, 1920, Singh notes that they cannot stand upright, but move around on all 4s. They're unable to speak a word, and they never smile. He also writes that they get along better with animals than with humans. They both fall sick and die soon afterwards. The story causes quite a stir, also in Europe's scientific circles. However, doubts soon start to be voiced.
The only eyewitness was Reverend Singh, and his veracity was put into question.
He was accused of making up the story about the feral children in order to collect more donations for his orphanage. The facts of the case have never been established. The case of Peter, the wild boy from Hamelin, leaves many questions open as well. In December 1725, having spent 4 months with human beings, he is presented to King George I in Hanover.
My lord, here you have Peter, the white boy from Hamelin. Your Royal Highness had already heard of.
He was found in the field.
The king, who is German-born himself, is very interested in the boy. He hopes to find answers to a much-discussed question of the time. What is innate and what is learned?
I don't know.
Peter promises to provide first-hand insights because he is considered to be a feral child. What better object for science to study?
We can examine him.
Human beings are in part animals, but not completely. And when a human being is not given the opportunity to develop that part of him that isn't an animal, something within that human being suffers.
He just needs some more time.
He must be a feral.
In 1726, the king takes Peter to London, where he becomes an object of study.
His limbs are exactly like ours.
The scientists are convinced that he is a member of the species Homo ferus, or wild man.
I'm quite sure.
His most prominent feature is his inability to speak, and this must mean that he belongs to a subspecies of humans.
Why is he not speaking?
I'm quite sure.
At the time, people believed that God had given his children all that they needed in life. Language was thought to be an innate ability and not an acquired skill. Today, we know better.
There are sensitive phases during which our brain is being shaped. Synaptic connections can only form during these phases, not before or after. Speech starts to develop around the age of 1, and by the time we're 6, we've reached 95% of our language capabilities.
Peter. Peter.
Children learn to speak by imitating others. Without a human model, language can never be learned correctly afterwards.
Peter. Come on, try to say Peter. Peter.
Pete.
Peter can probably hear perfectly well, but he doesn't understand the meaning of the words, nor can he form sentences himself.
Peter.
When we use language, when we hear it, signals pass through intermediate areas of the cerebral cortex until they reach the so-called Wernicke's area, where we understand language. From there, the information travels to the Broca's area, where an appropriate, correct response to the read or spoken words occurs. Feral children have the Broca's and Wernicke's areas too. The main difference, however, is that the connections between these two areas have developed differently. In ordinary humans, the connection is very strong, whereas in feral children it's absent. This is why feral children are incapable of using language normally.
Peter's inability to speak could be explained by his having lived alone as a young child. On the other hand, it could just as well be a result of a mental deficiency. Peter's story raises more questions than it answers, and the same is true of most of those once thought to be feral children. According to contemporary accounts, however, Peter also displays other characteristics attributed to feral children. He's most comfortable in the company of animals. He likes eating plants, the bark of trees, and raw meat. And it appears as though he doesn't suffer from heat or cold. At court, many people regard Peter as a being who has been expelled from paradise. Probably because he seems to possess something they themselves lack: the ability to live in harmony with nature and its creatures. To them, Peter is an exotic beast, a creature that repels and at the same time fascinates them.
But all of us are somehow searching for something that we might just describe as paradise. And it's very hard to find paradise on Earth, except for unique seconds, maybe. When we imagine that a feral child is happy in the state he or she is in, then we have a feeling, or we develop a nostalgia for the paradise that we seem to be missing in our lives.
In the tales of Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Book, Mowgli's world is not perfect either. It's the animals who tell him that he is not like them, even though he lives in their community. At first, Mowgli only watches human beings from afar. Later, though, he sneaks into their villages to steal the red flower from them. Fire. This provides him with a crucial advantage over his enemies in the jungle. Nevertheless, in the end, he will have to return to the humans. Because whether he likes it or not, he remains one of them. Returning to civilization after living in the wild is difficult, though, as John, the monkey boy from Uganda, has also found out. Suddenly, there are new, totally different challenges to be dealt with. It's estimated that John spent 3 years living in the jungle with his troop of monkeys with no human contact. His behavior when he was discovered resembled that of an animal.
Oh, it was wild, it was wild. If you looked at him so much and he could retaliate, scratch, and people were running away. But again, when it came to washing him, because we had to wash him, we had to shave him, we had to take him to the clinic. So all those experiences were new to him. So he was hostile to people, especially to children. But to adults, if you gave him attention, he responded positively.
More than 25 years have passed since then, and John has become a recognized member of the community. Not least because, unlike Peter the wild boy, he had already been able to speak before he ran away into the jungle and lived with the monkeys.
Feral children can only be partially integrated. It depends on how long they grew up in the wild. We know of cases where children had already acquired language before being abandoned and were reintegrated into society. There were no problems at all in terms of language, even though they had considerable social problems because they were out there with the animals during certain stages of their social development.
In the past 2 decades, John has achieved astonishing things. He sings in a choir and has even travelled to England with it. He lives in his own small house, cooks for himself, assists Daisy, and helps out at the orphanage whenever he can. But as he himself says, he's happiest in the company of his cows.
I would like to buy at least 3 cows and have them near my house. and I want to get some money to put up a fence to keep the cows in, with a gate that can be closed.
John is still shaped by the time he spent in the wilderness, and sometimes he behaves strangely. And yet, he has given Daisy so much.
I learned from John what compassion means. Compassion to the point of self-abandonment.
Although John is regarded as being slightly mentally handicapped, he's making good progress, thanks to the support of his foster mother. In 1999, he competed in the marathon at the Special Olympics for Uganda. Since then, he has represented his country several times, playing soccer, for example, and once he even served as team captain. Africa is a continent full of stories. Many of them tell us about the coexistence of man and animal, how each one needs the other, and how both are connected with each other forever. And yet, John's story is unique. So unique, in fact, that the boy they used to call Monkey is something of a local hero today, a legend. There is hardly a child in Uganda that does not know about him. Unlike John, who was already 5 when he escaped his stepfather, Mowgli was taken in by wolves when he was still a baby. He had only just learned to walk, as Rudyard Kipling tells us in the Jungle Book. The animals only accept the man cub into their community because the boy shows no fear. As improbable as the story may sound, experts do not believe it to be impossible. Under very specific circumstances, feral children like Mowgli might indeed exist.
It may be possible in the case of children between the ages of 2 and 6. We have some fairly credible accounts of these, but in by far the most cases throughout Eurasia, children have fallen prey to wolves.
So the ancient legends may contain more than just a grain of truth. Certainly, alpha wolves are at least willing to share their food with the rest of the pack, unlike dogs. Here, only the erect tail reveals who is the boss. The subordinate animal receives his share as well.
Primitive people will have noticed how similar we are to wolves, how similar our family life is. So people's imaginations played a big part, of course.
In actual fact, wolf couples stay together throughout their lives. And wolves love solving problems together as well.
Like humans, wolves always strive to cooperate, whether it's doing things together for wolves, or playing cards for human beings, or going for a walk with your dog and having a wonderful experience together. Successful cooperation is in itself enough to trigger the system of rewards in our brains. And I think that for wolves, that may be reason enough to do things together.
wolves and human beings have a lot in common. Mowgli cooperates with his family as well. He is a brother in all but blood, as it says in the Jungle Book. The other animals call him a hairless wolf. Time passes. Weeks turn into months and years. And the man cub grows up to become a teenager. The animals call him Master of the Jungle. Yet increasingly, the cry can be heard, "What does a human have to do with us? Let him go home." Life with his family, the wolves, is still running smoothly. But Mowgli's days in the jungle are numbered.
Where's Daddy? Say hello to Daddy.
The pain of leaving is something Rudyard Kipling himself experiences as a child. So he wishes all the more for a sheltered life for his daughter Josephine, for whom he writes the Jungle Book.
I love you.
But he knows that the reality is often very different. During his research, he also comes across Peter, the wild boy, who King George I once brought with him to his court in England. Before long, however, the court and the scientists become bored with him. The boy whom Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe, referred to as a body without a soul because he lacked language, spends the rest of his life in Hertfordshire, north of London. Up until old age, he loves living outdoors. Whenever he gets the chance, he runs away from the farm where he's been housed. But the farmers receive an annual pension from the king's treasury in return for looking after Peter. They give him a collar with his name and address to make sure he doesn't get lost on his wanderings, and with him, the royal pension. Peter spends almost 60 years on the farm, yet he will always remain alone.
If a person is unable to undergo certain stages in their development, their bonding capacity will never be fully developed. This will stay with them throughout their lives. We consider attachment disorders to be chronic. They don't get sorted out in the course of time. People don't recover. In other words, if this development doesn't take place during the first few years, the capacity is lost forever.
Peter is never able to enjoy his excursions for long. There's always someone eager to take him back to the farm, because the inscription on his collar promises them a reward. At the time, neither the people who keep recapturing Peter nor intellectuals such as Defoe can agree on what the wild man ultimately is. If anything, people tend to view him as something akin to a human animal. That might even make him morally superior, since he knows neither envy nor jealousy. Appropriately, contemporary sources report that throughout his life, Peter never showed any interest in money. Nor was he interested in the opposite sex. Even in his own day, many doubt his past as a feral child. Instead, they suspect a mental disorder. Today we could presumably find reliable answers. Based solely on contemporary paintings, it's recently been suggested that he suffered from a rare genetic disorder. In history, however, he will go down as Peter, the Wild Boy, who was put on display for money by the people he lived with until the bitter end. On February the 22nd, 1785, he dies at the age of over 70. His gravestone commemorates a boy who fascinated scientists for a short time. A boy whose discovery was more exciting to some of his contemporaries than that of planet Uranus. A boy whose real name is to this day unknown. For Mowgli as well, it's time to say goodbye. It's not only the animals that want him to leave. On one of his excursions, he meets a woman who claims to be his mother. She begs him to return to the village. And so the first chapter of the Jungle Book ends with the words, "The dawn was beginning to break when Mowgli went down the hillside alone to meet those mysterious things that are called men."
The jungle
grew too small for Mowgli, but his return was more a case of like it or not. It wasn't a triumphant return to humans in the sense of, now that I'm grown up, I'm going to conquer the world. It is a painful, gradual farewell. Mowgli goes back because he has to return to his kind.
Yet even though Mowgli will live among humans from now on, he will always be drawn back to the jungle. Another, less known story from the Jungle Book tells us that for the rest of his life, he will protect his brothers, the wolves, as a gamekeeper. The story of Mowgli, the feral child, makes Kipling world famous. His daughter, for whom he once wrote it, will never learn about it, however. At the age of just 6 years, she dies of pneumonia.
The loss of his daughter was a terrible blow for him. His contemporaries say he was a different man afterwards.
However, the adventures of his hero Mowgli delight readers around the world to this day. And without him, there would be no Tarzan the Monkey Boy either. More than any other, Mowgli embodies the myth of the feral child. And unlike in the real world, his story even has a happy end.
Look for the bear